We're Marley and Marley. Our hearts were painted black. Wait, oops, wrong movie. Hello, my lovelies, and welcome back to Pockets of Magic. I am Christina Wetterman, your head magician at Pockets of Magic. And on this day, it is Valentine's Day. Cat Child, what are you doing? I get to talk to you about Ever After. Now, as you recall, I was supposed to do this last week, but I ran into a lot of issues, but it worked out because I now get to talk about a Cinderella story on Valentine's Day. And what more perfect day could there be for a Cinderella story? If you have not seen this movie yet, why are you watching this video? Go and watch Ever After. Hold on, I need to see where you can stream this. I'll look up where you can stream it and put it somewhere, or you can get it on DVD if you're an old fogey like me. Ever After is the movie with Drew Barrymore, Angelica Houston, and Doug Ray Scott, and there's a whole host of other cast members who were utterly fantastic. It's just, I freaking love the movie, okay? Let's just go with that. I used to be able to quote the whole thing, and I love history, and I really enjoyed researching the historical accuracy and the more Hollywoodizations of this movie. It was so much fun, and I cannot wait to share them with you. I think you're really going to enjoy them. Yay! Okay, so let's get started. Now, obviously, this is a Cinderella story. You have a servant peasant person, Cinderella-esque girl, Drew Barrymore, who falls in love with the prince, Doug Ray Scott, even though her evil stepmother, Angelica Houston, aka Morticia Adams, doesn't want her to do that. Also, we stan Angelica Houston in this house. She is beautiful. She is lovely. She's a wonderful actress. We just don't like her character, Baroness Rodmilla de Ghent. We'll get into her later. Took this fairy tale of Cinderella and they set it in what is 16th century France or 1500s France. So basically, medieval France. Centuries are a little weird. Like, we're in 2025 right now, so it's technically the 21st century, even though it's not 2125. We're going to do this in two parts. I'm going to first talk about what they did that was more historically accurate, and then I'm going to talk about what they Hollywoodized a little bit more and tell you about what was more accurate. I don't care that it's not historically accurate. I have a degree in history. I tend to care whether or not things are correct. But I love this movie so much, I don't care. Now, at the beginning of the story, you have these two gentlemen going to meet this elderly woman. The French Revolution occurred from about 1789 to 1799, and these two gentlemen that we're meeting, they're known as the Brothers Grimm. In fact, that's how they're introduced on screen.
The Brothers Grimm, Your Majesty.
So you have these two brothers. They were writers. They collected various folklore, various fairy tales, and published them in a lot of different volumes. Their first one was called, hold on, I have to look at my notes. It was called Children's and Household Tales, or in German, the Grimm brothers were German, Kinder- und Hausmärchen. So the Brothers Grimm, they published this first collection of fairy tales in 1812. So the beginning of the movie is off to a great start. Now, who were these two brothers? I've always been really fascinated about these two brothers. I was like, why are these two brothers writing and collecting all of these things? What made them want to do that? And I just find it really fascinating. The Brothers Grimm, or the Grimm brothers, or whatever, were two German brothers named Jacob and Wilhelm. Jacob was the older, with Wilhelm being a year younger than Jacob was. They both lived in Hanau in the Landgraviate of Hesse-Kassel. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but they lived within the Holy Roman Empire, which is present-day Germany, and they were born to Philip Wilhelm Grimm, who was a jurist, and Dorothea Grimm, a daughter of a Castle City councilman. So Jacob and Wilhelm were the second and third oldest out of 9 children total, which in today's day and age is a lot of kids. Back then it wasn't, because unfortunately only 6 of these children made it into adulthood. And that was kind of common for this period where you wouldn't have children that would make it through infancy, make it through childhood. It just was very common. So I think it was also very common for people to just have a lot of kids. Unfortunately for Jacob and Wilhelm as well, their father passed away when they were 11 and 10 years old, and this actually left the family in a severe state of poverty. And with Jacob being the oldest son, it left him in charge of the family as well. As was common with this era, everything passed down from father to son, and especially the eldest son. So Jacob was in charge of, at just 11 years old, he was in charge of making decisions for his family, even though he himself was still growing. And Wilhelm was there to, kind of assist with that and help him out in whatever way he could. In 1798, the two brothers left their family to go study at a place called the Friedrichs Gymnasium. I'm pretty sure I butchered that because I don't know how to say that in German. But they went to go study at this school, which was paid for by their aunt. By this time, they didn't have any male providers. Their grandfather had died as well, so it just left these two brothers kind of alone, and they only had each other to rely on, and that's how they became really close. They actually graduated within 1 year of each other. So, what I found really interesting is that both of the brothers differed in personality and temperament. Jacob was more introspective, he was more introverted, whereas Wilhelm was more extroverted, more friendly and social. However, Wilhelm also had to deal with a lot of sicknesses, and that's actually why he ended up graduating a year later than Jacob did from the Friedrichs Gymnasium, because he had to take a year out due to health issues. After the two brothers graduated from the Friedrichs Gymnasium, they both went to the University of Marburg, where their law professor actually inspired in them a love for German medieval folklore. And that's what they both ended up studying at the University of Marburg. And upon graduation, eventually, like I'm cutting out a lot of middle stuff here, the two brothers went on to become librarians at Kassel. Cassel. I have no idea how to pronounce that. Gonna put the name up here though. Now, for some reason, in 1812-ish, because that's when they published their first manuscript, we're still not paying our librarians a lot. I have no idea why. Our librarians do so much. Go visit your local library. It's an important place. I love my local library. I get a lot of books from there that I don't end up reading and then have to return. Even though this job didn't pay a whole lot, it gave the two brothers a lot of time to research and to write. And between 1812 and 1830, they actually ended up publishing quite a lot of stories. Kinder- und Hausmärchen was their first collection of fairy tales. It contained about 86 fairy tales total, and the brothers collected these tales from all over the place. They got them from family members, local peasants, neighbors, friends. They really got quite a few actually from Wilhelm's wife, Henriette. What they ended up doing was they collected all of these fairy tales, all of these folklore things, and they rewrote them and they put them into this collection. The particular story that Ever After is based off of is Cinderella, or in German, it's known as Aschenputtel, the little ash girl. Now, this is really cool. I did not know this. I actually didn't know that the Grimm brothers only collected these tales and then rewrote them. I thought they made them up. Oops, I was wrong. Totally wrong. Apparently, the first known version of a Cinderella fairy tale or folklore or story or whatever you want to call it actually came from Greece. It is the story of Rhodopis, which was recounted by the Greek geographer Strabo, apparently sometime between 7 BC and AD 23. And it was about a Greek slave girl who married the king of Egypt, and it's known as the earliest variant of a Cinderella story. Now, the thing about the Grimm brothers version, their stuff was more violent. In fact, it was so much more violent, their versions of all of these folklore, that they received a lot of backlash for calling their collection of fairy tales children's and household tales. People read these and were like, these are not for children. These are not for children. Why did you call them that? And if you haven't read their version of Cinderella, because it definitely is not the Disney version, it's pretty bad. And so is their version of Rapunzel. In fact, I'm pretty sure all of their versions, like if I were to go back and read these, I would probably be shocked because, as we all know, Disney has watered down a lot of their fairy tales. Yeah, I can kind of see why they got a lot of backlash. There is no fairy godmother in the Grimm brothers version of Cinderella. Rather, her help comes from a wishing tree. Cinderella gets help from a wishing tree which is a tree that she plants on her mother's grave. That's how Cinderella is able to go to the ball, apparently. The next person we meet is this elderly woman. Now, she is known as, she actually doesn't have a name, she's just known as by her title, the Grand Dame. And I looked that up because I was like, is that a French title? I've only ever heard it applied to people like Judi Dench. I think Judi Dench is a Grand Dame. I need to Google that. So now we're going to get into the French noble titles. So Grand Dame is actually a French phrase that translates to great lady, and it's used to describe a woman who is elderly and highly accomplished or respected. That would obviously apply here to this woman. There are a lot of different titles that the French nobility had back in these days: esquire, page, knight, baron, count, marquis, so on and so forth. Oh, and duke, obviously. I guess the highest titles were prince and dauphin. I believe it is pronounced Dauphin. It is specifically applied to the heir, the presumptive heir to the throne. So it's not just any prince, like you had King Louis XIV and his brother Philippe Duke d'Orléans. Louis would have been Dauphin. Philippe would have just been prince. Now, what I found really fascinating about French nobility titles is that they're very hierarchical. So sometimes, depending on your stature within the French nobility, sometimes you could be like maybe a really high baron, and sometimes you could be a really low baron or whatever. So stature and respectability were really important. And this actually ties in really well to Danielle's father, Auguste. Auguste has no title, but he isn't a peasant either. He is what's known as bourgeoisie. That's where we get, so the French are where we get that term from. And in this day and age, in the medieval era, he, as we can see on screen, he owns property. He has a house, he has servants, he has horses. All of these things are freakishly expensive in medieval France. And Auguste was a merchant. They had money, most of them, and they were, at this time, they were essentially the middle class of France. So Auguste isn't a nobody. However, that does mean Baroness Rodmilla de Ghent did marry down. So she married somebody without a title, even though she had one, and technically speaking, her title is only like a step above the lowest title, but who's keeping score? So while Baroness Rodmilla de Ghent may have married down, this also means that Danielle was never a servant to begin with. I'm not. It's fine. I don't totally hate Rodmilla again. It's fine. Angelica Houston is just such a great actress. Just God bless her. She's so brilliant. She probably has one of, if not the best insult in a movie that I have ever heard. And she doesn't yell it, she doesn't scream it, she just says it very matter-of-factly to Danielle's face.
How can anyone love a pebble in their shoe?
Oh, oh! God bless Angelica Houston. Rodmilla de Ghent got what she deserved. So Danielle's father, Auguste, let's go back to him. He was part of the bourgeoisie. He was basically part of the middle class. And from what I can tell, at the start of the movie, he may have been like upper middle class. Nothing to sneeze at. He's done really well for himself, and that's really great. Just know that you can also hate the Baroness just a little bit more, because Danielle was never a servant. I'll get off of my soapbox now. The book. So the book that Auguste gives Danielle, Utopia, was written by Sir Thomas More, and it was published in 1516 in Latin. It didn't actually get printed into English until 1551, but it does seem to have been a very popular book for its time, which is probably why he ended up picking it up for Danielle. Danielle is a bookish girl like the rest of us. We love her. All right, now we're going to get into the more historically based characters, starting with King Francis. King Francis I of France was a real person. He was born in 1494 and he died in 1547. His reign started in 1515, so he reigned from about the age of 21 to 53. What I found really interesting about Francis, he was not expected to inherit the throne. He actually wasn't supposed to. Both kings before him died without what they call issue, so they died without heirs. So when Francis was just 4 years old, he was already a count after the death of his father, and at just 4 years old, he also became heir presumptive, or dauphin, of France. Francis actually married twice, which we'll get into later, and Henry, his son, he would have been Henry II, and I believe it's actually pronounced Henri. He was the fourth child of his first marriage, and even though he was one of Francis's younger sons, he would eventually come to succeed Francis as king. Oh, now my favorite part. Yay! One of the fun things about researching monarchies and kings and I really should look into queens and see how often they have it's the opposite of a mistress, a mister. During his reign, Francis kept two official mistresses at his court, and he was the first king to officially give the title maîtresse en titre to his favorite mistress. So his first official mistress was Françoise de Foix, the Countess of Chateaubriand. And then in 1526, she was replaced by Anne de Pizzalu Daly, the Duchess of Étampes, who, upon the death of Francis's first wife, actually wielded a lot of political power at court. And that's what I find really fascinating about mistresses in this era. A lot of them held more power than queens did. Kings were like, I have to marry you because political reasons, but I actually love this person over here and I just tolerate you. It's essentially what they did. And it seems like that's what Francis's second mistress also did. And now, for my favorite character, Leonardo da Vinci! He is essentially the fairy godmother in this movie, or fairy godfather, fairy god person, whatever. He's brilliant. I love him. Obviously, Leonardo da Vinci was a real person. He was an Italian polymath of the High Renaissance who was active as a painter, a draftsman, which by the way is a skilled worker who creates technical drawings or plans, an engineer, a scientist, a theorist, a sculptor, and an architect, and I could keep going because there were so many things that he did. This man just kept going and going and going and going and going. Holy cow. What's really great about Leonardo da Vinci in this movie is he is both historically accurate and a little Hollywoodized. And I don't really care because he's freaking great. He says my most favorite line in the whole movie.
I have been born to privilege, and with that comes specific obligations.
Horse shit.
Leonardo da Vinci was born in 1452 and he died in 1519. So Da Vinci actually did know the French royal family, which I found this really cool. Francis I, he gave Da Vinci an offer of employment in about 1516 when Da Vinci was 64 years old to come to the royal palace and be a designer. Da Vinci actually ended up designing the decorations and things for Francis III's christening. Obviously, Da Vinci is most well known for his painting of Mona Lisa, which actually makes an appearance in this movie. He was also an inventor, he studied human anatomy, and he did actually invent flying machines. What I want to know is if he actually tried to invent walk-on-water boat shoes. And did those actually work, and can I try them? I want to know if they worked! Now, he does mention Michelangelo being quote unquote trapped under a ceiling in Rome and that he's just a second choice. And I don't think this is actually the case. Michelangelo actually painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel from 1508 to 1512, so well before the events of our movie. And if we're gonna get really stupidly technical, the Sistine Chapel is actually in Vatican City, which is its own city-state within Rome. So it's not actually part of Rome, but it is inside Rome. The Vatican City is its own thing with its own laws and rules and things like that. This was my most favorite thing that I learned about this movie. Rock, paper, scissors. So Danielle and Henry play the game rock, paper, scissors when they're hanging out with the gypsies, which, for the record, I believe is a derogatory term. They are known as the Romani people, so I'm gonna not use that term moving forward. Anyway, so they're hanging out with these people and they're playing rock, paper, scissors. And I always thought that was a little weird because I was like, isn't that a modern game? Like, didn't we make that up in the 19th century or the whatever, it's 20th century? Turns out I was entirely wrong. So rock, paper, scissors was potentially invented in China during the Han Dynasty, and then it made its way over to Japan, where they kind of modified, that's the word I want. They modified it, and it didn't officially come over to Europe until about the 1900s. But that was so fascinating. I did not realize that it was a Chinese invented game. That's really cool. Okay, so we're almost done with our what's historically accurate part, and then we're going to move on to what they Hollywoodized a little bit, which I think is going to be so much fun. I'm so excited. So, we all know Danielle's, I would almost call them surrogate mothers. They're the servants. Louise is the oldest one. Her husband is Maurice, so he's that servant that we see at the beginning, who gets sold by Baroness Rudmillidigant to pay for her taxes. If you recall, at the beginning of the movie, Danielle throws an apple at Prince Henry because he's stealing her father's horse. He gives her a bag of coins for her silence. She shows these coins to her two servant friends, and she says, "I know just what to do with them." And Louise responds,
But the king has sold him to Cartier. He's bound for the Americas.
i.e., her husband Maurice has been sold. He is going to be sent off to travel across the sea. Remember, this is France. And since we're in medieval France, traveling across the sea is no joke on a big wooden ship where most people died. Cartier, however, was a real person. So his name was Jacques Cartier. He was a French Breton maritime explorer for France, and he was born in 1491 and he died in 1557. What's really interesting about him is a couple of things. First, he was the first European to describe and map the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the shores of the St. Lawrence River. The biggest thing, though, is that he was commissioned by Francis to take 3 voyages to the west for exploration. He did one in 1534, one from 1535 to 1536, and his last one was in 1541 to 1542. Based on when our story takes place, I'm guessing around 1539-ish, Maurice would have been on this 3rd voyage had Danielle not rescued him. So that's really fascinating just to kind of place it all in, into this historical timeline and just kind of see where things were taking place. It's also important to note that by about 1541, Jacques Cartier had been supplanted by a Huguenot courtier named Jean-Francois de la Roque de Roberval. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, Huguenots were French Protestants. So back in medieval times, we had a lot of disagreement and a lot of division between Catholics and Protestants, and Huguenots were the French Protestants of this era. That's what they were called. So that is pretty much everything that's historically accurate that I could find. Anyway, so now I get to tell you all about what they Hollywoodized a little bit, or a lot of it. I'm so excited. The biggest thing they Hollywoodized is Henry himself. I know, our main character, our prince. He was Henry II, or I believe as it is pronounced in France, Henri of France. He was, as I stated earlier, the 4th child between Claude and Francis I, so he wasn't expected to inherit the throne. However, his older brother died when he was only 18 years old. That's how Henry became heir presumptive to the throne. I should also mention he was born in 1519 and died in 1559, so he was about 40 years old when he died. Very young. We did not live very long during this day and age. He married a woman named Catherine de' Medici, who was part of the powerful banking family, the Medicis of Italy. This family, the Medicis, and I think there's like a Netflix series or something, it's on my list of things to watch. They had gotten so powerful that they were able to get their children married into royal families, which is kind of what you wanted because it was good. That was how you obtained power back in those days. Now, as I said, it was very common for us, for human beings, to die early back in these days. And because of that, it was also very common for us to get married very, very, very young. And especially for royal engagements, some of these engagements, they're like, you're going to get married to this person, and they were engaged when they were 3 years old. Can you imagine being engaged when you're just 3? Catherine and Henry actually got married when they were both 14 years old, and this was before Henry became heir presumptive, so he never would have been engaged to an infanta or princess of Spain. But also, just for kicks and giggles, I looked up who the king and queen of Spain would have been in the movie. Holy Roman Emperor Charles V and his wife Isabella of Portugal. And also, they have one of my most favorite parts in the movie where they just stand there and yell at each other, and I actually had one of my friends who knows Spanish translate it for me, and they're basically saying, no, it's your fault.
Tu culpa.
And it's brilliant, and I love it so much. As I said earlier, remember, kings back in this day and age really, really liked to have mistresses because their royal marriages were business transactions, essentially. Henry wasn't any different. When he was just 15 years old, he actually started an affair with a 35-year-old widow. That's a 20-year age gap. What the heck? But anyway, she was a 35-year-old widow named Diane de Poitiers, and she was his mistress all the way up until his death in 1559. And in many ways, she wielded more power at court than Catherine did. When I was doing my research, one of the ways in which she wielded a lot of power is she made sure that Henry and Catherine had heirs. And I'll let you fill the blanks there. Like, she basically made sure that Henry had heirs with his wife. I just find that really fascinating. Like, she had so much power. She basically told Henry, make sure you go see your wife. And, you know. If you'll recall, earlier I said Francis I married twice, and he actually didn't marry anybody named, oh my god, what's her name? Marie. Marie didn't exist. And he was married twice, not through divorce, so technically her statement, divorce is only something they do in England, is correct.
Divorce is only something they do in England.
Francis's first wife was Claude of Brittany, and she was his cousin. Claude was the mother of Francis III and Henry II, and unfortunately for this poor, poor woman, she's basically spent her entire marriage just pregnant, 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 and she had a lot of miscarriages from what I understand. I believe, from what I read, she gave birth to 7 children, only 2 of whom made it to adulthood. We just did not have very great life expectancy in this day and age, and unfortunately, Claude passed away when she was only 24 years old. And to this day, we don't know what she died of. It's hotly debated whether or not she died like from complications of childbirth, a fever, some sort of sickness or something. We don't know. What's noted about Claude of Brittany, though, is that she had a limp and a strabismus of the left eye. And this was really fascinating. A strabismus is where when you look at an object, your eyes don't align properly. One still is looking off to the side or whatever. And somehow in medieval day and age, we were still judging women for their looks because she was also noted for not being very pretty. When are women not ever judged for this? However, it was also noted that she had a kind and good-hearted nature, so she was well liked for her good and kind heart. Yay. So after Claude died, I mean, obviously Francis still had his mistresses, which he was very discreet with, but obviously he needed to get married again. Kings need to be married and or politicalness. His second wife was Eleanor of Austria or Eleanor of Castile. Eleanor was an archduchess of Austria and an infanta or princess, so the same as a dauphin of Spain, or what was known as the Holy Roman Empire in this day and age. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. She was the Infanta of Castile from the House of Habsburg, and she was also the older sister of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. So that king and queen that we saw from Spain, she was his older sister. She actually married Francis in 1530 as part of the Treaty of Cambrai, which basically Francis and Charles weren't getting along, which is normal for this day and age. All these kings are like, no, I want more land. No, I want more land. No, I want more power. Blah, blah, blah. And they get into these tiffs and cause wars. Anyway, so Charles and Francis weren't getting along. However, Eleanor came over and married Francis as an attempt to create peace between the two kings. What I found interesting about Eleanor is she was actually engaged to Henry VIII, and maybe it's a good thing she didn't marry him. Her marriage to Francis was also her second marriage before she had been married to her uncle, King Manuel I of Portugal, who died of plague in 1521. One of my favorite lines from King Francis in the whole movie is when he yells at Marie, "He's your son!" And he just goes back to whatever the heck he was doing.
He's your son!
Henry, obviously, not the son of Eleanor. He was her stepson. Remember, at this time, Francis had a lot of, well, he did have a lot of mistresses, but his 2 official ones, he would have been with Anne at this point, and he spent a lot of time with her and tolerated Eleanor well enough. And that quip that Marie gives about divorce is only something they do in England, here's what I found out. Henry and Catherine separated in 1531, and their marriage was officially annulled in 1533, which, as far as I know, I think that was the first time to have ever happened. But yeah, the divorce between Catherine and Henry was obviously really big for that day and age. It created a whole host of problems. Henry became head of church in England. It's a whole thing. It was a whole thing. I think in many ways Henry really disrespected an infanta of Spain, and that is just not something you do. Don't do that. Moving on. So, back to my favorite character, Leonardo da Vinci. Remember, he died in 1519, so he actually would not have been alive when Henry was older. I don't care. I love Leonardo. He's the best. Funny enough, however, Michelangelo was alive. So even though Leonardo jokes that he would have been a second choice, I just find that kind of funny. The biggest Hollywoodization in this movie, I don't know if it's the biggest, well, whatever. The Mona Lisa, she's not painted on canvas, she's painted on wood. You can't roll her up. Specifically, she is painted on fine-grained white poplar, and she was painted in 1503. So, like, some 30 years before when this is supposed to take place. She now has her own room in the Louvre. She is very well protected. Actually, what's fun about her, she makes an appearance in Knives Out 2, The Glass Onion. And if you haven't seen that, I highly recommend it because it's a lot of fun. Because Daniel Craig is like, I'm just gonna be me. Well, not me. He's basically having fun, and I love it. And the Mona Lisa appears in a very big way. So as we all know, Baroness Rodmilla de Ghent is trying to keep Danielle and the prince from seeing each other. Evil witchy woman that she is finds out that Danielle is seeing the prince and has turned her mother into a comtesse or countess and all of this stuff. And so she lies to the queen. She tells the queen Comtesse Nicole de Lancre is engaged to a Belgian. And so the queen, loving her son, goes and tells her son she's engaged to a Belgian. And Henry's like, what the heck? What do you mean she's engaged to a Belgian?
Engaged? To a Belgian?
Belgium did not exist. They made it up. Well, I mean, Belgium exists now. They didn't make it up. But it didn't exist in this day and age. The country as we know it today was formed in 1830 after the Belgian Revolution, after it seceded from the UK and the Netherlands. There we go, I got it. From what I could tell, the country's name didn't even exist before 1830. The first reference to it was in like 1790, referring to the first Belgian Revolution. Danielle couldn't have been engaged to a Belgian, so now the Baroness is really, really getting imaginative with her lies. Let's just go with that. She knows how to weave a very, very good lie. So much so that she invented a whole country. Oh, Baroness Rodmilla de Ghent out here inventing whole countries so that her daughter can marry Prince Henry and become Queen of France. She really got what she deserved.
And you are getting on my nerves. Now get to work.
Anyway, moving on. Speaking of Henry, I wanted to know whether or not he had actually established any universities, because that's something that royal people can do or have done or whatever. Unfortunately, I couldn't figure this out. I couldn't figure out whether or not he was responsible for any universities getting established or not. The only thing that I could find was that there are a few universities that were established, at least in this era, or at least when Henry would have been like king. Yeah, when Henry would have been king. The first one was founded in 1539 and it is called the Université de Nîmes. And the second one was founded in 1548 and it is called the Université de Reims Champagne-Ardenne. I really hope I didn't butcher those. But yeah, that was all I could find about universities and whether or not Henry actually established any universities during his reign. Basically, it's a big maybe. And that's pretty much it. Those were really all of the big things that I found out about Ever After. I really love this movie. I think they did the story well. I think the actors and the actresses did a really great job. What I really love especially is the portrait that Da Vinci paints of Danielle looks very much to be in his style of painting, and it's just such a fun movie. And if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend it. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed researching it and telling you all about it and learning with me. Next week we're actually going to talk about one of our women of history, Cleopatra, and I'm so excited. That girl, woman, person has a lot of tea in her history, and I cannot wait to tell you about it. So make sure you come back. Don't forget, on Wednesday, we're going to do another play video. We're going to talk about how to play more. But if you want to hear more history stuff, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and come back here on Friday. I will catch you all on Wednesday and then Friday. Bye.